For Chapter 1, Key Issue 2, the next part of our Unit 1, we're going to be looking at how to identify the geographic characteristics of places, including the toponym, the site, and the situation. We're going to be able to identify the 3 types of regions, and we're going to describe the geographic definitions of culture. So why is each place on Earth considered unique? A place is a specific point on Earth distinguished by a particular characteristic. So if you're describing the features of a place, it's a building block for geographers. They explain similarities and differences and changes across the Earth. Geographers also describe a feature's place on Earth by identifying its location. So location is the position that something occupies on Earth, and a place is its characteristics. So in South Florida, our location would be, 27.6 degrees north, 81.5 degrees west. That's our latitude and longitude. We're on the we're bordered by the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. We're at sea, that's how you're going to find out where we are. We're next to Georgia. If you're looking at its features, its place, we're a state that's at sea level. We're a place with sandy soil, tropical to subtropical climates. Because we're on the banks of so many bodies of water, we're a tourist destination. So place or characteristics, location is its actual, where is it? Where can you find it? Location can be identified in 3 main ways. So the name, or a toponym. So a toponym is a name given to something. And names can come from people of prominence, or people who are vital to the history of an area. Can come from religious affiliation, can come from the physical features or the origins of its settlers. So Boynton Beach is named after Nathan Boynton, who was a major in the Civil War and then built a hotel where Boynton Beach is now located. So Boynton Beach came from the name of someone who was prominent in our area. Places of religious affiliation, St. Augustine. So St. Augustine reflects the Catholic heritage of the early settlers to Florida. Physical features, so places like the Glades. The Glades refer to something that's in the Everglades. Or the origins of its settlers. So you've got places like Florida. Florida is a Spanish word, right? So Florida annotates our Spanish settler history. Things like Boca Raton, these are Spanish words. Miami, Hialeah, Okeechobee, Calusa Park, which is right next to our school. These names all show it reflects the identity of our indigenous people in Florida, so the Native Americans that lived here before the Spanish settlers. Site is a physical characteristic of a place. So characteristics could include climate, water sources, topography, soil, vegetation, latitude, and elevation. So the site of Florida, we are at sea level. Our latitude and longitude, 27.6 degrees north, 81.5 degrees west. Soil, sandy. Vegetation, tropical. Topography, we're pretty flat. Water sources, Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, the Floridian and Biscayne aquifers. And our situation. Situation is a place relative to other places. So we are east of the Gulf of Mexico. We are west of the Atlantic Ocean. We are south of Georgia. Boynton Beach is south of Lake Okeechobee. Our school is inland from the Atlantic coast. So if we look at Shanghai, we could talk about some characteristics of Shanghai. So Shanghai, again, site, physical characteristics, situation, its location relative to other things. So the site of Shanghai, so here's Shanghai, you'd find Shanghai on the coast of the East China Sea. Shanghai is along, right? It goes along, it's on the bank of the Yangtze River. And in Shanghai, you can see lots of skyscrapers. So these I'll tell you about the site of China, its physical character, or the site of Shanghai, its physical characteristics. Its situation gives you a little more information. Its information is it's on the west side of the East China Sea. So now you know where it is relative to the rest of it. We know that it's at the mouth of the Yangtze River. So this whole river here, the Yangtze River, when we just say it's on the banks of the Yangtze River, Shanghai could be anywhere. But the mouth of the Yangtze River puts it right here. It's in eastern China. So now you know if you're looking at a map of China trying to find Shanghai, you would be able to find it in the eastern coast. All of these characteristics, all of its location, help build the sense of place for Shanghai. So because of it being on the mouth of the Yangtze River and located on the East China Sea, Shanghai is the world's largest port, which makes it a center for trade and business. And so all of its location data, its site and its situation, can help contribute to its sense of place. When we talk about points on Earth being unique, we're going to often classify them by regions. And an area that's defined by one or more distinctive characteristics is at a region. And we usually apply them at two scales, so political states and within a political state. A political state, when we refer to a political state, we're referring to really what you call normally a country. In the United States, when we talk about a state, we're talking about really what's called a province in many places. But know that a political state is really like an independent country. So we can look at regions across political states or regions within one. And a region is going to get its unified character through the cultural landscape. So cultural landscape is a combination of religions and culture and physical features. So there are three types of regions. The formal region, which is also called a uniform or homogeneous region, is an area where pretty much everyone shares a common characteristic. So common language, economic activity, or climate. This characteristic is often predominant, not universal. And these are usually formal boundaries. So in the case of the United States, each of our states is a formal region, right? A city within a state is a formal region, or a county. In the case of this map that shows the different election data from the 2004, 2008, and 2012 elections, you can see that some states can be considered blue states, which means they usually vote for Democrats. And some states are usually considered, red states, because they're usually going to vote for Republicans. And then we have a region that's called a functional region or a nodal region. And these are areas that are organized around a node or a focal point. And usually it's going to have something to do with a function. So it's going to start at a central focus. It's going to diminish as it goes outward. And we're usually talking about something with a functional or economic value. So like the newspaper circulation. Where is the New York Times distributed? Where is the Palm Beach Post or the Sun Sentinel distributed? And this map here shows you TV network signal. You can see TV channels on your cable providers, internet providers, cell phone towers, bus routes, highways, you name it, delivery routes, airplane hubs, like where do your flight patterns go? These are all functional. And then the last one is vernacular or perceptual region. And this is an area that people believe exists as part of their cultural identity. And so a big one in the United States is the American South. The American South is an area that individuals recognize as having distinct environmental, cultural, and economic preferences. But what defines the American South isn't clear to everyone. So like Oklahoma, do you consider Oklahoma part of the South? And so some people, if you look at the definition of the South, some people consider Confederate states as belonging to the South. Some people look at, if you look at the South, they're looking at below average high school and college graduation rates as being a right to work state. Having winter precipitation exceed 21 inches, so having a wet season and a dry season instead of like a spring, winter, fall, and summer. Being more than 50% Baptist. Having their last freeze before April 1st. And so if you look at the map, even though it gets really cluttered, you can see that the last freeze includes some places and not others. And so what defines a state in our country as being part of the South might differ a little bit, but everyone kind of knows what you mean when you say the South. And so I think universally people will be like, yeah, Georgia's in the South, Louisiana's in the South, Alabama's in the South. It's just, some other states that are kind of on the border. Other perceptual regions could be like the Middle East. So I think everyone would agree that like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Israel, these are all countries in the Middle East. But what about Sudan? Would you consider Sudan part of the Middle East? What about Eritrea? What about, Uzbekistan? So there are areas where you're not always sure. So what do we mean by culture? And we'll talk a lot more about culture in Chapter 4, which is the second chapter we'll be covering in Unit 1. But culture in general is a body of customary beliefs and material traits and social forms that constitute the distinct tradition of a group of people. And culture is really important because it's learned. So culture is something that not every animal has. So culture isn't something you don't inherit it genetically. You have to teach it to each other. And so you could take a person from anywhere on this planet and let them be raised somewhere else, and their culture will be different. You have the capacity to learn any culture, particularly when you're young. The origin of the word culture is from Latin, cultus, which means to care for. And we care about things, we take care of things, and that kind of defines culture. Although, again, I can't emphasize enough, culture is a learned pattern of behavior, and it's shared. You can't have a single culture to yourself. We look at regions of culture. We study what do people care about. So things like their beliefs, so religion, language, ethnicity. And what do we take care of? So what do we make? And the things that we make and what we consider to be material wealth might differ if we're looking at like a developing versus a highly developed country. And when we look at areas and regions, it's really important to also look at the scale. And so spatial association, again, is really important. So your book finishes with this case study about rates of cancer in the United States. And so if you look at the small scale, as far as like the whole nation, you can see that the eastern half of our country has higher rates of cancer than the western part of the country. And the textbook makes a leap for you and tells you that the eastern part of our country is more industrialized, there are more factories. So in this case, they're linking these higher rates of cancer to industrial causes or factories. And if you look at this map here, it looks like Maryland doesn't really have a problem. Like it looks like it doesn't have that much cancer. It's below the 180 per 100,000 people. So let's blow it up and look at a bigger scale, right? So here's your graphic scale, right? So we blow it up and look at a larger scale, and we can see that within Maryland, there are areas that clearly have high rates of industrial-caused cancer, rates of 200 people per every 100,000. Just like the darker areas in this map. And so you can see that Baltimore does have a problem, and that eastern Baltimore has higher rates of cancer than western Baltimore. And again, you can extrapolate from that there's probably wealthier people living in the western half, because if you can afford to not live by a factory and industrial waste, you usually do that. So we can assume that the people who are living here are living near either active factories or industrial sites that were shut down because either they don't know about it or they can't afford to live anywhere else. But if you look at this map, it looks like Baltimore has kind of high rates, but it's not super bad. And again, that can be misleading, so let's blow it up again. Are there areas in Baltimore that have those high rates of cancer from industrial causes? Rates of cancer of 200 per every 100,000 or more. And yes, there are areas of Baltimore that clearly have high rates of cancer. And there's areas of Baltimore that don't. And so this looks like, Baltimore is in the clear, just like Maryland looked like it was in the clear, but you're not. And you could, again, make that same prediction that these areas here with low rates of cancer are people who could afford to not live near industrial sites. If you can afford to not live downstream from a factory, you do that. Also, if you have more money, you have more access to healthcare in our country. And so even if you had cancer, it would be caught sooner. So access to higher education, access to money, access to healthcare, it makes a difference. And so when we're looking at regions, remember, it matters if we're looking at as far as the state level, right? This is a small scale map. We're looking at regions at a national level. And now you're looking at cities. When you look at the city level within the state, at a bigger scale, these are all formal regions, but the pattern isn't as clear. And then when you break it up into different neighborhoods within one city, even at a bigger scale, you can see that there's still a different pattern and there can still be problems. So just like you can manipulate data by changing the sample size in science and geography, you can manipulate data by looking at things at different scales. So keep that in mind when you're watching the news or learning things in this class.